Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to continue with the battle report from Hybrid World. As I mentioned in the last video, I had 6 robots at Hybrid World, so we covered the 2 Beetleweights last time round, and this time round we're covering the 4 Antweights that I had there. So I had 4 Antweights in 3 different classes: A League, which is the fully destructive league, a 2v2 league, and then the non-destructive league. So I think today we're going to look at just 3 of those robots. This is a party, which is my vertical spinner, slightly rubber, which is my rubber-based wedge or rubber-printed wedge bot, and blind spot. Blind spot is the one I'm going for, which was my 2v2 dustpan robot. So we're going to look at those 3, and I think I'll put disguise into its own separate bonus video because the non-destructive stuff is a little interesting. There's not as much interest happen there, so I think disguise will happen maybe Tuesday or maybe tomorrow. I don't know. We'll put up a bonus video for disguise anyway. But there is a lot of fights to get through, so we're going to voice over these fights, and let's get to it. Like I said, there is a lot to cover today. So here we go, first Antweight fight of the day, and this is a party versus Blade Tip. Blade Tip is sporting, of course, it's titanium blades and a brand new nylon shell, so it's going to be interesting. And as you can see, the weapon worked pretty well, but then one big hit, and this is a party broke pretty badly. I mean, I did manage to bend up one of the titanium blades on Blade Tip, but as you can see, that has left me completely crippled because my weapon has come completely out of the chassis, which it was epoxied in place, so I have no idea how that happened. Also, this left me kind of crippled because that means there is 50 grams of weight kind of floating around on a tether on my robot, which means that I'm basically dragging this extra mass around, and it's kind of dragging me around to a certain extent too. So I do get stuck and caught a little bit, and as you can see, I'm kind of flipping all over the place because the mass is kind of trying to drag me backwards while I'm trying to drive forwards, which is not good for anybody. Also, I'm not sure why there's this wobble in the footage. It looks like somebody's been hitting the arena or something, but yeah, as you can see, with the weapon broken, I'm a little bit of a sitting duck, especially as he is such a good pushing robot. He's been a good driver and good at pushing people around for a long time. I kind of thought I might have had a chance here, but as you can see, I didn't actually manage to capitalize on that as well as I wanted to. I found that I was working a lot better with him on my front wedge because, of course, I wasn't careening up and over like that. So from here on out, the aim was to try and get him on that front wedge and then get him down into a pit. But, of course, I'm pretty crippled, so this is it's not exactly where I wanted to be, and then I end up going down the pit. And up next we have our first 2v2. Now, unlike most 2v2s, this 2v2 tournament worked in a completely different way. So we signed up to 2v2s without a team in mind. Normally we sign up with somebody and join their team for the day. In this case, because it's a 2-day event, basically everybody signed up a robot in 2v2s, and every single match you got paired up with a different partner against different pairs of robots. And the idea was that you won points based on how well you did in your 2v2, and then the winner and first and second and third place were all done based on how many points you had, and there was going to be no finals because, of course, it's pretty hard to do finals when nobody's actually in any set teams and you're earning points individually despite the fact that you're in a team fight. So this is, as you can see, a bit of a pushing match because there are 3 pushers and grabbers out there. And then we have Too Good to Flail, which is a flail bot. Not a melty brain, just a straight up flail. And unfortunately, that went into the pit early. Well, fortunately for me, because it was on my opposing team. And yeah, so then that just left Dynamo. But if you've seen any of these videos before, Dynamo is always a really well-driven robot. So even with 2 of us on the field still, it's not a good thing, or it could go either way, especially considering I'm upside down and a little bit crippled at this point. I think one of my wheels got jammed out in a hit from somebody, and that is making it a little bit hard for me to drive at this point in time. So obviously with 2 of us here, I'm just kind of playing shepherd a little bit, trying to keep him in a corner, not doing particularly well at that, but that's what I was kind of trying to do. Of course, trying to get him into one of these pits that are now open, which, yeah, it always seems to be the way it goes when you have a couple of wedges in play. So here we go, and there we go. He then goes down the pit, so we win that one as well. So moving into round 2, we are back with This Is a Party, and as you can see, I did manage to get everything redone, so I re-glued everything together, and hopefully got it a little bit stronger. As you can see, that first hit was really quite promising here, and I was quite happy with that, and I mean, not happy with the fact that I've kind of bounced around a little bit, and then here is the annoying issue. He managed to get his, while I was upside down there, he managed to get his spinning weapon in, and he has ripped one of the wires completely out of the motor, completely out. There is nothing left connected to that motor, so that motor is now dead, which is really not fun. Obviously, I'm now stuck upside down with a weapon that's not working, so I can't really self-right. Not that I'd want to, because I have a feeling it would blow the weapon off. Considering what happened last fight, or maybe not. I don't. At this point, I really don't know. But yeah, I just kind of want to get back to being up the right way would be nice. But as you can see, that's not happening. And then thankfully, he actually does hit me, and I go back up the right way. And then he goes in the pit. And as you can see, there's the wire sitting up the top, which is supposed to be connected to the motor, but is definitely not at this point. And here we go with Slightly Rubber's first match. Now, Slightly Rubber was also entered into the Destructive League, mostly because I had not fought This Is a Party before, so I didn't know what its weaknesses were going to be, so I wanted to have another robot in the competition, so that if This Is a Party blew up like it kind of did in the first match, that I would still have a shot. So even though This Is a Party is now 1-1 and lost 1, I still have Slightly Rubber entered in, and of course, this is Slightly Rubber's first fight here in the second round. Of course, it's a bit of a hard match because it is up against Wheelie Fast, who is a really good pusher and has driven really well a lot of the time. So usually in a pushing match with them, it's not an easy thing to win, which is unfortunate because that's what I'm in right now. I don't have a weapon, so it's going to be all about that pushing match. Thankfully, at this point in time, they hadn't actually cleaned their wheels off, so my silicon wheels were giving me enough traction to kind of push back at them, which is nice. Usually later in a tournament, for some reason, they start cleaning their wheels and kind of make sure the arena is a little bit cleaner so that they get more traction up against people like me. But at this point in the tournament, they hadn't done that, which meant that I was able to push them around a little bit, which is always nice. It's definitely easier when you can push your opponent around while you're in the middle of a pushing match like this. Now both pits are open, and oh, there they go down the pit. So Slightly Rubber wins its first match, and I was not expecting that win. Okay, and flicking back over to the 2v2 fight for round 2. This is me with Too Good to Flail versus Uppercut and the Force. So once again, this is kind of going to be a bit of a pushing match. I mean, there's two pushers, a flail and, well, actually a flail and a thwack bot out there. So there's a bit of kind of drive aggression going on in terms of the thwack and the flail bot out there. And then, of course, there are two pushing robots. And here, I actually managed to get the Force up inside the dustpan, up on his side, which I found really cool. I didn't realize I could kind of push people up into that position, which is nice. Also, you can see that the hinged mechanism down there, it kind of works, but it kind of doesn't. I think I need to improve this hinge mechanism. It's good for some things, and it does seem to get under robots a lot of the time, but there are still instances where it doesn't do that. And then, there we go, cut above goes down the hole, which is really good, because that means there is just one robot to worry about. Too Good to Flail is sitting over there, flailing away. I am actually trying to feed the Force to either the pit or Too Good to Flail, because I have seen that flail hit wheels off, so I was kind of hoping that we could do something like that. And you can see here I was trying for that, and then actually managed to get him in the pit anyway, so we won that one. And after a short break, we go into round 3, and in this case we have Slightly Rubber versus Escobar, which is a pretty nasty horizontal spinner. So obviously, being that this is a spinner fight, I was basically attempting to keep my front pointed at him and jam him up either with my actual rubber wedge or by hitting him into the wall. And I do that relatively well, but there's a couple of hits here where he actually gets a good bite on the TPU and kind of takes some chips out of it. He then gets turned upside down, so his weapon is a lot higher, meaning it's not actually hitting the TPU anymore, and it's actually hitting the PLA lid that I've got here, which is a little bit scary because it starts ripping screws and things out, which was really not good for me. So I was a little unhappy with that one. And then right there, he actually hits in underneath the lid and kills the switch. It was a perfect fluky shot, and it completely disabled my robot because it obliterated the switch that hides in underneath the top cover at the back there. So that's me out for this fight. And time for This Is a Party's third fight of the day. As you can see, I got it back up and running. I borrowed a weapon motor, an old weapon motor off of Shrapnel, actually, Chris, who runs Shrapnel. And it did work. You saw it got a good hit up there, and then from here on out, it kind of seems to lack a little bit of power. And I think this is why he retired it in the first place. You can see that the hits aren't all that great. I'm not gyro dancing as much, which means the weapon's not spinning as fast. And after every single hit, the weapon is actually stopping completely, which means that there is something, I think, wrong with this, the brushless motor that I'm running. But hey, at least I managed to get the robot back up and running and put a weapon back on it. There was a couple of times here where, you know, like you just saw before, I threw Rhino, which is the big flipper robot. I threw it over, but of course it's a flipper, so it can just undo that pretty easily. So I knew that this fight, kind of about this point, I knew that this fight was not really going my way. My weapon's not really working. I've spent half of my time upside down, and I can't really do a whole lot while I'm upside down. I'm a little bit defenseless upside down. I'm also getting really, really used to driving upside down at this point. So backwards is forwards, and then I drive into the pit because I was so used to having that stick reversal that I just messed it up. And then we're back over to the 2v2s, and I'm continuing the trend of fighting against somebody and then having them become my 2v2 partner in the very next fight. Because as you can see here, I'm fighting with Cut Above, the thwack bot that I fought in the last round of 2v2s. And this one is going to be a pretty intense shoving match. Obviously, we're up against Tron Legacy, which is a good shover and grabbing robot. And then I can't actually remember what the other robot's name is. Antimatter, there you go, Antimatter. And Antimatter has actually proven itself to be quite a good shoving robot in the 2v2 competition. Despite the fact it has really thin wheels, it seems to get a lot of grip and traction on those. And I don't quite know how that's being done, but they have been quite effective here. And there's a lot of kind of back and forth pushing that you can see going on in this first little bit of the fight. It's the same with all of these kind of pushy fights before these pits open. It's just a lot of back and forth and waiting for those pits to actually drop and just, you know, putting on a little bit of a good show. There were good crowds actually at this event, which was really good to see. Had a lot of people walking through and watching, and here I'm in a little bit of trouble because I'm being forced over towards the pit by Tron Legacy. Thankfully I managed to flip myself back over and get out of there, which was quite good, but I was in a little bit of trouble. And yeah, here you go. You can see that Antimatter is actually doing a fair amount of pushing, considering that I have some really big silicon wheels. I was a little bit annoyed at that. And I also do get teamed up on a little bit here and then shoved into the pit, which wasn't all that much fun, but that's kind of how it goes in a 2v2 like that. You know, sometimes they actually work well together and prioritize, and that's kind of what happened here. And then Cut Above was left in the arena, and unfortunately Cut Above can push things around, but not things that are as wedge-shaped as Tron Legacy. So that's going to make this next part of this fight quite difficult, and of course I can't do anything. I just have to sit here like you guys and watch this fight as it continues, and then Cut Above goes down the pit, so we lose that one. And here we go, it is the start of day 2 and the start of round 4, and now Slightly Rubber is versing Sawtooth. So far Slightly Rubber has actually got a pretty good track record. 1 win and 1 loss, which isn't actually too bad considering that the 1 loss was the switch got completely blown to pieces. In this case, I did take the robot home overnight and actually fix that switch. I replaced the switch completely and then push the switch further back into the robot so it was a little bit more protected. You're actually going to hit the motors now before you hit the switch, which is, I think, a good thing. I don't really know. We're going to have to test this out in future things, and also just make sure that I'm not ever hit on the back by a spinner ever again, because that was not fun to deal with. Yeah, and then, so this fight, it's a bit of an interesting one because these saw blade cutters like this are actually kind of the big weakness of TPU. Anything that sits on the TPU grinding away is going to get a much bigger cut off than something like the weapon I was facing in the last match, because those things are just kind of impact spinners, and the impacts on TPU just kind of make everything bounce and flex, but saw blades actually sit there and just keep cutting and keep digging in, which is kind of the worst thing that I can be going up against. Thankfully, he tends to wheelie a little bit as he drives forwards, and that means I can get the wedge in underneath him, and he hasn't been able to do too much, and then he cuts the wheel off. Well, cuts the silicon off the outside of one of the wheels, which is, I'm going to be honest, it's not ideal. I'm going to have to try and free myself here, and thankfully I do manage to do that, but then there is an extra silicon wheel in the arena, and I am badly lopsided now. One of my wheels has a lot of traction, and the other one has virtually nothing, which is a very difficult thing to drive. As you can see here, I start kind of like edging my way around the arena. I'm basically going really slowly and really carefully, making sure that any movements I make, I'm actually moving in the right direction, because if I try and move too fast, then the wheel with grip is just going to spin me around on the spot rather than moving in the direction that I want to go. So it's a lot of kind of really feathering the throttle to make sure I'm getting where I want to go. And it's just a very frustrating thing to drive at this point, because it's so hard. I'm like, oh, he's really close to the pit. I could capitalize on this. Wait, no, I can't, because I can't move. I can't get over there in time. It's going to be well out of the way before I get there. And it kind of meant that I was trying my very best to stay away from the pits, because I knew that one false move around the pits and I was done for. So I was just trying my very best to stay as far away from them as possible. Obviously, it's not all that easy to do because it's a very small arena. And then thankfully, he makes the slip up that I was trying to avoid and ends up going in the pit himself. Also back in round 4 is, this is a party now sporting a brand new weapon motor that I swapped over at home overnight. So obviously there was a lot of repair work that I had to do overnight, which is kind of why the Beetles didn't really get as finished as I wanted them to be. There was a lot of Antweight repairs that I had to do. And as you can see there, the weapon mount is actually holding up pretty well. I was bouncing along the ground and I wasn't actually breaking the weapon mount, which was a really good thing to see. But now, of course, I'm stuck upside down against a grabber and I'm really not liking that. So I try and self-right with the weapon and break everything again, which is not great. And also, this time round, not only does the cable break, or the actual mount break, but a cable breaks as well. And this time it breaks completely off the ESC and also completely out of the actual motor itself. So I really need to fix that. I think I'm going to need to put some like hot glue or something around where the cables come out of the weapon motor so that they actually stay in big hits like this, because that meant that this motor was completely gone. And now you can see I'm kind of like stuck upside down, kind of sort of stuck on my own wiring here. And the 10-second count has kind of started, but because he touched me, it gets reset. And I'm just sitting duck, and then finally managed to kind of, no, I fall in the pit. Of course I fall in the pit. There was never any way that was going to end differently. And up now is the fourth 2v2 match, and I am now with Dynamo, which I quite like. Dynamo is a good driver and a good pusher, but we're up against Drop Saw, which is actually a saw blade on an articulating arm in a 150 gram weight class. This thing is such a cool robot. He did have a slight problem though, because he couldn't actually self-right all that well on the day. So as he goes over here, you'll see it kind of pushes up a little bit, but can't get quite all the way over, which does help out quite a lot, because it means that his saw blade is then out of action. Honestly, I was really quite scared of him going into the competition, because I don't put a lot of time and effort into my top armor for my robots. Some of them are literally just very thin pieces of plastic, so I was very worried about an overhead saw in this competition, but as you can see, people worked out he could be flipped over pretty quickly, and he kind of got flipped, I think, every match, just because we knew that's what you could do against him. And now it's just going to be a pushing match, because the big weapon is kind of out of the way. Cut Above is trying to get him flipped back over, but I'm also trying to keep Cut Above away from Drop Saw, just so that we don't have that happen and he's not back into the fight here. And now one of the pits is open, so we're going to try and get everybody down the pits, and of course Drop Saw is the first to go. Take out the thing with the weapon first. That's usually the way this works, and I almost go in the pit there, because of course I'm driving upside down, which means my controls are all inverted and around the wrong way, but I do manage to stop myself just in time in this case, which is not how it always goes for me, and then Cut Above goes down the pit, so we win that one. So here we go with This Is a Party's final fight. As you can see, it's taken so much damage over the weekend. The weapon is now just gone. It has been completely removed. In its place, there are some metal wheel guards and also some chain in the front to give it a bit of counterbalance. And this is a huge thanks to John, who builds Tron and Tron Legacy. He helped kind of get this guy back up and running for me. And we're fighting basically a full body spinner, but essentially it's a kind of overhead bar spinner that uses screws on the outside of that to kind of add the attacking edge, I guess. So my attempt here is just to kind of keep on top of him, but I'm not really doing that very well. The robot is handling a little bit differently because everything's not quite where it was before, and I'm starting to lose a lot of pieces of the front of my robot. Mostly because it's been so battered and bruised and repaired and re-repaired over the weekend that things just don't go well. And then, of course, here I lose the silicon off one of my wheels, so I now have like not as great driving capabilities, which means I can't keep on top of him. And there's a lot of times where he's over by the wall like this where I can't capitalize on that because I'm not getting to him in time to kind of finish him off there, which is just, it's not helping, really. Especially considering that every time he's hitting me, he's taking huge chunks out of the front of my robot. We definitely need a better plastic to print this chassis in for the next iteration, because this is ridiculous right here. So yeah, it's an interesting fight. I'm basically just kind of continuously being hit in the face and hoping that he breaks, and what's actually happening is I'm breaking, and I'm breaking a lot. Yeah, so it's not really going in my favor. I do get him over towards the pits a couple of times, but once again, because my movement is a little reduced, I'm unable to fully capitalize on that, which is kind of hurting a lot. If I'd still had my silicon, this fight would have gone a lot differently. He would have been in the pit by now, I swear, if I still had the silicon, but that's the way it goes. And then as you can see, I'm being slowly torn open, and now you can see the chain in the front of the robot, and it's just got flung out, which means that now if I accelerate too hard, I flip up, but it doesn't matter because I end up in the pit anyway. So many issues with that robot over this weekend. So from the problematic to the reliable, we now have Slightly Rubber up against Mr. Blade Jangles. And Slightly Rubber is actually doing pretty well. It's only lost one fight so far, which is a good start to this competition, or at least it's a good way to go in this competition. And yeah, here, Mr. Blade Jangles, I'm not sure if he was having problems with his blade or something. He didn't kind of get the blade spinning very early in the fight. He did manage to get the blade going eventually and get that up and running, but that's not really something I'm too worried about. The TPU is going to protect me quite a lot there. I am worried about being upside down though. He doesn't really drive all that well upside down, so I'm trying to get myself back over here by basically just jamming myself into his weapon, and then he realizes what I'm doing and stops the weapon, which was kind of annoying. Because, yeah, he's running an aluminium weapon that's like, I think, about 5 grams or something, so it's not going to really damage the TPU that I'm running. So, yeah, realistically, all it was going to do was throw the robot back over to where I wanted to be, which means it was actually kind of a smart call to turn that weapon off and keep me upside down like this. It's very annoying trying to drive upside down. I really should try and put some form of drive inversion on my controllers, especially the Arduino ones like this one is running. Thankfully, I do manage to get back over, and we're back into a bit of a good fight. I somehow managed to get in underneath his little metal wedgelets that he's got on the front of his robot, which I find quite cool. I mean, this is literally just a one-shot print TPU chassis, and it gets under a lot of other robots in the competition, which is good. Like, it's not something that I was expecting when I printed this chassis way back, I don't know, like a couple of years ago almost. Now, it is probably, and he gets some really good shots there, and I go down the pit. I was going to say, it is probably time to retire this chassis though. So now it is time for the final 2v2 match for Blind Spot in this tournament. This is the round 5 2v2, and as I mentioned kind of right at the start, there isn't going to be a final for the 2v2, and Blind Spot is actually doing pretty well at this point. I think in actual fact it's coming second or third right now, and the way this fight will go depends on, will determine if it gets second or third for the overall competition, which is kind of cool actually. And I'm here with Dropsaw, and as I said before in the last fight, Dropsaw gets tipped upside down quite a lot, and it's now kind of sitting in underneath the camera, upside down, which is not good. It means I'm now fighting a 2v2 fight on my own. However, I've somehow managed to disable Tron Legacy, which I didn't know was possible, and I'm quite happy about that. Unfortunately, the Force manages to get to him before there was a pit open that I could drop him down, and then the Force does go down the pit, but that means that it's me versus Tron Legacy, and Tron Legacy with the grabber seems to be a little bit superior to the dustpan robot style that I've got going on, especially when he can do things like this and grab my up-hinged dustpan, because I end up on the wrong side of that deal and usually end up in the pit. This time round though, I actually managed to almost pull a reversal out on him, but didn't quite get there. I actually pulled my punch a little bit. I should have forced him a little bit harder, although I'm not sure what would have happened there, because Dropsaw has technically been immobile for a little while, but you don't get counted out unless your whole team gets counted out, so I don't know. I probably should have pushed a little bit harder, to be perfectly honest, but that's the value of hindsight right there. And then here I'm back in the grip, which is always never a good spot to be, and we're near the pit, and that's it. It's all over, and I've lost that one. So I think that means that we've got third with blind spot for the 2v2s. So we're now moving on to the finals, and for the destructive class, Slightly Rubber has ended up in a three-way tie to try and make it into the finals. So this is a three-way tie to become second in our group bracket, and if you come second, then you end up into the finals. So this is a pretty important match. Basically, the winner of this match goes through into the finals and actually has a chance to potentially place get. Although there are 6 people going into the finals, so I guess you end up in the top 6 rather than having a chance to, like, instead of being confirmed that you're actually going to place get. So I am obviously in this fight against 2 rather big spinners, both of which I lost to in previous fights. So that is kind of unfortunate for me, and unfortunately for you, that hit just there, I managed to push Escobar into Mr. Blade Jangles and cripple him. So one of his wheels is broken here, you can see, and that was from that previous hit where I pushed Escobar into Mr. Blade Jangles. So I'm going to take that kill. That one was kind of mine. And then, yeah, I actually did pretty well out of that fight. I managed to come away with the win after pushing one of my opponents into the other and then pushing the other one and get him to unstabilize and go down to the pit. So I'm happy with that result. So winning that fight meant it was time to fight again, and in this case, we're actually going up against Dynamo. So this here is in the preliminary finals. This is to get a place to go into the semi-finals. And of course, I haven't actually fought against Dynamo with Slightly Rubber for this competition. I fought against him and with him in the 2v2s, but this is now in the Destructive League. And again, this is just going to be a bit of a pushing match here until one of the pits opens. It's always the way it goes. But I can say here, I was kind of nervous about this fight. I mean, this is a critical fight to go through into the semis, and I'm up against Dynamo, who is a really good pusher and a really good driver. I was actually quite surprised that I managed to get him stuck up against the wall there for a second. It's not usually something that you can do, but of course I couldn't hold the pin for too long. You can only ever hold those pins for about 10 seconds. So I did have to let him go, and unfortunately it was way before the pits opened, so there wasn't really much I could do about that. Here we've got a pit open, and Dynamo's just kind of shoving me around. He's really got a good control over this match so far. I've been trying, but I've been ineffective. His wedge has been sharpened and ground down, and he's a lot closer to the ground than he normally is, which means my wedge doesn't get as much purchase as it normally does, which is not fun, really, because I don't really like being up over top of him, because when I'm like that, he has way more grip with his tracks than I have. And here, I've put him in a really precarious position. I think he was going to get off, and then I kind of just give him that final little nudge and push my way into the semi-finals. And that was great. I was really not expecting to come away with a win there. And up we go into the semis, where I'm facing a refurbished blade tip from the damage that I'd done to it a whole day ago with a completely different robot. So once again, this is a very pushy type fight. In fact, there wasn't a whole lot of weapon robots that managed to make it into the finals. I think it's just because after such a long event, a lot of those weaponized robots were suffering the damage from themselves that they obviously inflict as they go through and hit things. So there ended up being that I think out of the top 6, there was only 2 spinners out of that whole lot. So yeah, lots and lots of pushy robots. And again, this is just going to be a back and forth pushing type match. there's not really going to be a lot that we can do until the pit's open. Here I'm kind of exploiting one of Blade Tip's weaknesses, which is if you manage to get under his little tips at the front there, he actually ends up sitting on the back lip of his chassis and his wheels don't touch the ground. So if you can get him into that position, you can push him around a lot easier because the wheels just aren't touching anything. And it's something that I've learnt with some of my previous designs, which is why like This Is a Party, for example, has exposed wheels at the back, so that if I'm up on somebody's wedge, the wheels still touch the ground. Because I've seen it in my own robots and in robots I've fought like this, that it's just, it's an issue, especially when, like I said, you get up on somebody's wedge and your wheels don't touch the ground and they're just pushing you anywhere they like. And it's actually something we might have to address with Slightly Rubber in the new chassis design, because that is actually an issue that I have right now too. So here, the yellow pit is about to drop, and thankfully I managed to get off the yellow pit just in time. I was sitting on there when the buzzer for the yellow pit rang, and I was like, nope, 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 got to get out of here. That was not fun. And there we go, we end up down the pit. But it doesn't end there. So for making it through to the semi-finals, I'm now in a third place playoff against Wheelie Fast. So obviously there was a fight between these two way earlier in the tournament, and we actually came out on top in that one. This time around though, as I kind of mentioned in that previous fight, they have cleaned their wheels off and added some traction compound, I think, to them, and also added some, we've actually cleaned the arena out a little bit, which means they have way more grip than they had in the previous fight. So I'm a little bit worried, and as you can see, they are pushing me around quite a lot and flipping me over. That is one of the annoying things about Slightly Rubber, is that once flipped over, there's not a lot I can really do. I really have to spend some time to get myself flipped back over before I can actually consider taking the fight to somebody, especially somebody like Wheelie Fast, who is quite a good little dustpan robot. If I'm fighting somebody with a weapon, I can usually fight relatively okay upside down. But yeah, up against a wedge like this, I really need to make sure I'm up the right way, which has been unfortunate because, as you can see, I've spent a lot of time upside down and then got really unlucky with when the pit opens. And there you go. So that was a lot of fights to cover. And as you saw, I made kind of finals-ish in all three categories here, or all two categories here. So Blind Spot came in third overall without there actually being finals in the 2v2, because that would have been a little bit weird with the way they set up all of the 2v2 stuff. But we got a third from that, which is kind of cool. Slightly Rubber ended up coming fourth for the non-destructive competitions, and I think it is now time to retire Slightly Rubber. This chassis is beat up in an incredible way right now. The front wedge is kind of gone. So this particular chassis is getting retired, but that's okay because I've really recently got some green TPU. So we're going to print a brand new version of this out of green TPU, and it's going to address some of the issues that this thing has, because it has a few issues here and there, and that's not good. That wheel is kind of starting to slide off. Anyway, that's one of those things that needs to be addressed in the future. But that guy did pretty well. And then we have This Is a Party. I don't know. It showed so much promise, but that weapon, this weapon, just kept breaking off every single time. So I need to do something about that. The problem is, to do something about that, I need weight. This whole robot is at 151.3 grams or something, which means I am right on the limit, because my group allows for a 0.1% error margin or something. So this guy is as heavy as he can possibly be, and I'm having issues, and I need to add more weight to reinforce this motor mounting plate. I have some ideas. I might be able to swap the aluminium motor mounting bracket for Lexan, and also change the weapon bar over. So this weapon bar that's on here, or I did run, is my heaviest weapon bar. I can actually change to a slightly longer weapon bar that is slightly lighter. Overall, it should have about the same amount of kinetic energy and a hit, but it will actually be lighter on the robot, which will mean that I'll have a little bit of weight so that I can add some epoxy and some bolstering on the robot itself. So this guy will definitely be back again at some point in the future, because yeah, I can't let it go out like that. It needs a better send-off than getting completely annihilated in most of its fights. So I hope you guys did enjoy this video, and I will see you in the next one.